Good afternoon. Welcome back at Bain with Nine Business Group. And joining us today on Business Spotlight interview is Joanna Shea. Joanna Shea, please introduce yourself and most importantly, introduce your company and what you guys do and what sets you apart from the competition.
Hi, thanks for having me. Really appreciate being here. My name is Joanna Shea. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Negotiations Collective. What we do is we help people create more. And so you might and can ask the same question, what is more? To you, it might be confidence, it might be profit margin, it might be respect, it might be long-term value. You've got to assess what more is, and then we help and train people how to get it. So our team is comprised of incredible individuals with a deep expertise in negotiations. Some are retired hostage negotiators from the FBI or SWAT. Others are government negotiators or commercial negotiators like myself. And what we've done is we've blended the behavioral psychology of influence, persuasion, those components lead to de-escalation, with the commercial negotiation tactics and developed our training. And so what sets us apart from competition is the skill that each of us have. Like, these are individuals that commercially we've negotiated over $40 billion worth of transactions and saved lives. So that's something different. A lot of people, when they ask about negotiations, will push them to consider the conflict resolution and de-escalation training. And they say, no, I just want to know terms and conditions and I want to get more money. And we're like, but you're dealing with people. You're dealing with people. You have to know how to respect them, how to react, how to respond. Because if you can't de-escalate the conflict that's going to occur in a negotiation, you're never going to get to the terms and conditions.
I love that. So let's start there. What does it mean to de-escalate?
So we break our de-escalation training into 4 parts. And the first part is about respect. I don't like being disrespected, and probably nor do you or anybody listening. So respect is a big component of self-awareness, right? There's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like in the workforce, like we're dealing with the top 3, but we've broken it down into something called the fears, where if there is a conflict and you need to figure out how to de-escalate it, you need to figure out what you did. You got to own it. And for the fears, was it due to lack of fairness, lack of empathy, lack of autonomy, or lack of recognition? And so we take our clients on a journey of self-awareness. We've got customized cases that will trigger to make them recognize what of those fears are their drivers. Because again, first step to de-escalation is acknowledging that you were probably part of the problem. But that also means you're part of the opportunity. So with the respect assessment and the self-awareness, then you go to react. Is that if you know how you were triggered, how did you react to it? Because the biggest protector for anybody's mental health and mental state is curiosity. But a lot of people are not trained to be curious. They're trained to defend themselves, to defend their position. And so for the first respect, then react, did you get defensive? Did you blame? Did you lose self-control? Because if you did, you've created a problem that could have been avoided. If you kick first about when you're considering de-escalation, respecting them, respecting yourself, and then getting curious, you also stay calm. Your amygdala doesn't hijack. You don't go to fight or flight. So then you can move to response, and that's real tactical. What time of day? Where are you going to meet them? How are you going to meet them? How are you going to communicate with them? We're very, very process driven in our training. And so if you've respected, you've reacted and responded, then you can resolve.
It sounds like, but I want you to differentiate. It sounds like there's a lot of needed emotional intelligence in this process, but what does emotional intelligence, emotional quotient do, and what role does it play in the process to de-escalate? Is it the same? Is it just fancy words, or is there more to what you guys do and what you teach and train?
Well, there's such fancy words. Well, question to anyone who's listening to you, what's the one thing we all deal with all day long? It's people. To deal with people, to successfully deal with people, to create value, you have to understand the people you're working with. It's emotional intelligence. And granted, there are perhaps the Elon Musks of the world, that they are so bright and so capable that they have been able to just push through and not worry about the emotional damage that has been caused. And I am complimenting him on his technical accomplishments, but he even in his recent book acknowledged that the emotional intelligence isn't a driver for him. But for the rest of us, me, who's not Elon Musk, right? I focus on the EQ. And so it's reading the room. That comes with an assessment and understanding of body language, nonverbal cues. I mean, the research on how much of a conversation is percentage based on verbal cues, it ranges from 90% to 60%. But are we watching people? Are you talking to them or are you talking at them? Because if you're talking at people, you've lost them. They're looking away, they're trying to escape, they're shutting down on you, they're getting defensive. Whereas if you're talking to them, you're also asking questions. And you're listening and learning and drawing information out them that then creates a collaborative conversation versus a lecture.
Okay, I'm gonna go off script and I apologize, but I think there's something to be learned here, so bear with me. We spend a good portion in the last 4 years, we've moved a good portion of our life to being online, to being in Zoom as we're talking here today. What impact does that have, or can we still negotiate effectively via Zoom, or should it be in person?
If you're asking me my opinion, it is in person.
Okay.
There's something called proximity complex. We're better together. We're kinder together. You're shoulder to shoulder to someone, you're not going to be a keyboard warrior and insult them. There's no consequences to people's actions when we're online. There's none. Whereas if you're in a room together with someone, it's hard to be cruel. It's hard to be mean to someone where you're eyeball to eyeball with them. And there are some positives that came from what happened to us a few years ago. Not many, but we're better together. But to your
I agree.
question, can you negotiate online? Yes, you can. Absolutely, especially if they're in Germany and you're in Canada, right? Or we're dealing with someone in Hong Kong right now. I'm not going to fly there for a 30-minute meeting. So we're doing it online. But there's nuances that are missed because of it and an opportunity to warm up to one another and collaborate better.
What kind of nuances do we miss online?
Body language. I'm
Body
looking at
language?
the screen to make you think I'm looking at you. I'm not watching you right now. Now I am, but I'm not looking at the screen, so there's communication miss.
Yeah.
So what we teach is that if you're negotiating with someone like this, you've got a second reading that person.
I'm not sure we always have a second. So,
Yeah.
can you talk to us about the process, or have you already, in which you teach people how to improve negotiation? Or what are those kind of methodology models that you take your teammates through, you take your class, your people through, and your clients through to improve their skills and knowledge and to execute a better negotiation?
Yeah. So we err on the side that people are capable, competent, kind, not manipulators. And I think that is the majority of humanity. Just don't watch the news. But people sometimes get overwhelmed and they'll jump into negotiations and they're capable and they could have pushed for more, but they didn't focus on it. They didn't prepare. They didn't have a process and they went blah and they missed out. So our process is quite regimented and we call it the SPIVs. Ha! But the first part is strategic networking. When we teach negotiations, we look at it like a three-legged stool. Strategic networking is leg one. If you do not know the who, you're never gonna get your what. And if your who is ignoring you in a negotiation, constructively, it means your value proposition sucks. Right? Like your question to me, like what makes us unique? There's a lot. Right? We do have competition, no question, but we've got a lot of unique values that are added to our training and to our people. We are a differentiator. So that's the strategic networking. Who's your who? What's your value proposition? Have you managed your first impression? Have you utilized your network to get in front of the player? The next step is profiling, SP. The profiling is putting our trainees into some, not like we don't go deep like insights, we don't have time, but very easy case designs where they're triggered. So we immediately see their negotiation or conflict type. So they self-assess themselves. And then from there, we break down the types that we discuss and we go over the pros and cons to each. We go over how to identify them in a counterpart and how you need to adjust and be nimble to get the best out of that style. That's the profiling component. And paired with that is the conflict resolution and de-escalation training. So back to the SPIVs, strategic networking. Second step is profiling. The I stands for influence. Are you trained in assessing your power and their power, in their persuasion and influence tactics? Have you considered the ethics and how you're likely to engage? And then the cross-cultural components. So that's the influence piece. Who are you sitting with? Are you using the correct triggers to soften them so that you can create value together? Because if they're in high defense mode, you're not going to be able to open things up. The V, is value. Truly considering what they want. Negotiations aren't one-sided. They're two or multiple party-sided. So what do they want? What do you want? Have you created boundaries that you're not going to walk past, but have you ensured that when you kick off a negotiation, you've anchored appropriately? So the value component is quite thorough. And then the last part, S of our SPIVs, is the strategy. Is it a distributive negotiation versus an integrative one? Is it a win-lose versus a win-win? Like, are they coming for you, or is there a potential to build so much more than just what's on the table together? And that is often the case, unless you're buying a house or buying a car, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
One thing I want to pick out of there, if I can pick and choose a little bit, talk about anchoring and what does it mean to be anchored. And you talked about the value equation and to be anchored.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Can you give us a practical example of
Of
what it would
course, I'd
mean
love
for
to.
somebody?
Yeah. I just made a post on this on LinkedIn yesterday, or the company did. So good prompt. The anchoring is, there's a lot of people, a lot of schools of thought that say you shouldn't make the first offer. But when we do our training, and just think of it this way, is if you've done your preparation and you've really done a value assessment and have an understanding of what something is worth, yourself included, what you should do is make the first offer. That's called dropping the anchor. It's a psychological point that you plop it out there, like say just for fun, I'm $1,000 an hour. I just dropped an anchor on you. That's what I did. I planted it. So now I've forced you to consider, am I gonna counter? Am I going to accept? Or am I gonna walk away? Right? And whether or not that $1,000 has anything to do with reality, I've put that number in your head now and it's stuck. Right? And so tactically, if you look at investment banking, accounting firms, legal firms, et cetera, what do they hide dearly from competition is their rate sheets. And what do they send their clients when they're considering engaging in a master service agreement? Their rate sheets. They're anchoring to their clients. And some would say, don't put something on the table you want to learn. Well, if you've taken our training, you understand that you do not go in blind, ever.
So is it also a way in which the audience, the intended audience, if you will, builds a value equation against that anchor? So $1,000 an hour. Now I'm fixated on it, and I'm going throughout this conversation. I'm just either building a business case for or against the value of $1,000 an hour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because if a good negotiator is dealing with a good negotiator, the game is on, right? And so they've also done their due diligence, and maybe they have come up with, say, like a mid-market value of $500 an hour, right? And so, I mean, it's not just about dollarly rates, it's about the team, and there's so much more to value than just money. I mean, that's the kids' leagues if you just look at the dollar value. But a good negotiator is going to try and beat to the anchor. If they can't, they're going to come up with reasons why. Like a great example, the real estate market, right? The real estate markets, agents of the sellers anchor their clientele. And unfortunately, and I mean this constructively to any real estate agents listening, 95% of them are no good because they do not do their research. When we have bought and sold houses, and by we, I mean my husband and I, we grind our agents. We want statistics, we want Excel spreadsheets, we want all the data on price per square footage for all of the variables so that when we counter and counter strong, we launch that at the counter like the other agent and say, you tried to anchor us, but it's made of fairy dust. It's completely unrealistic, and this is why.
Okay, so let's have some fun because that just sounds mean and evil and so much fun at the same time. What other things in practical application that we could all benefit from in understanding negotiation better?
Well, I'd actually like to ask you a question. You just said I sounded mean. Please expand on that.
I think it's great. You took your knowledge and information and you changed the game.
Yeah.
You
How
went
is
back
that
to
mean?
the mean might have been the wrong choice words. I think it's fun. I
Yeah.
think it's engaging. I think it's it's conducting business in a way and changing the game in which somebody wasn't expecting.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
rules were all fair, right? The rules are set up. What you were able to do is you chose a part of the game board that is often neglected and
Yep.
chose to play there, which on the outside looking in could be mean. That's why it has nothing to. So it's not mean per se, other than do your job better.
Well, and
Because
that's
I'm
the
gonna keep
thing.
doing my job,
Yeah.
and if you want to represent your client better, get better.
Yeah. And that's like I would remove the word mean and I would say I'm a competitor. Yeah.
Sure, love it,
Right. Like it's my money. I've worked hard for it. I'm not going
thousand
to give it
percent.
away. Right. And so for anybody that's just sitting back with their feet on a desk, watch out. Because I think the world would be a better place if we, like, I love the middle. I think the middle is a great place. Like, I am a competitor, but I'm okay to call a draw. But be respectful, but don't be afraid to assert. You can be kind and fun and spicy and assertive at the same time.
Okay, so let's go back. I want to change questions.
Yeah.
Is it possible to take something that might be initially or more often than not a win-lose and create a win-win? And if so, how? And can you give us an example?
Yes, it depends. Like, okay, let's go back to the realtor, like, just scenario for that
Yeah,
case. So, what if I was a buyer that wanted to buy multiple homes? Say I was a commercial purchaser, like a Brookfield, and I wanted to buy multiple homes. And I went in and I tuned up the agent on the other side in a competitive, spicy way that was assertive. But they learned and they didn't come back and say I was mean. What they came back and said was, woof, you just took me to school, but I learned. Can you tell me more? I want more. And then I'm going to go, oh, this one wants to know more. I want to work with you. Let's do this together. So instead of not getting what that person wanted, they got maybe 10 more purchases, 100 more purchases, 1,000 more purchases from me. That's
love
creating
it.
a way bigger pie from a win-lose. Yeah.
100%. Yep, that's a great example. Thank you very much for that. If you were to go back in time, you said you were a professional negotiator as an employee for years. If there's one lesson business-wise,
Yeah.
you could go back and tell your younger self,
Oh,
what is the greatest lesson that you would want that younger self of you to learn sooner and faster?
slow down. Slow down. Joanna, slow down.
Why? How does that hurt you?
Well, I mean, I love where I am. I wouldn't go back and maybe I'd change a few things. But I'm very proud of where I am and my family and the businesses right now. But my younger self, Oh, I I I had some tough negotiations, and it because I was always in a rush to close. But because I was only focused on the end game, I compromised on so many things
Mm.
instead of slowing down and trying to collaborate with the other side. I had this thing in my head that speed equaled value, transaction after transaction after transaction. And that wasn't the case. So I missed out. I left a lot on the table back in the day.
Wonderful insight. Last, most importantly, who should find you? Where do they find you? Who's an ideal client for you? Who should phone you and say, I want to do business with you and your team?
Well, thank you for asking. So you can find us online, thenegotiationscollective.com. And it's funny, when I started this with my business partner, our target demographic was project managers, engineering teams, engineering departments. And that's because in my previous life, loved working with those departments, and they were so bright and so skilled in so many ways, and there was such an opportunity for improvement in terms of negotiation skills, because engineers are trained to be right, 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 task oriented. And so our target was engineering teams, again, project management teams, but we've pushed out. We now work, and by note, I'm focusing on teams, and that's what we do is we do team training. Because we used to do individual one-on-ones, but what we found was that they had these skills, but nobody else did. And that was hard for those that had these tactical pieces because there were just these blocks in place instead of having united language. So we trained departments and teams, account management, business development, engineering, accounting, finance. You're putting something to ink, we're working with you. And a lot of the clients that work with us, we've got like a pretty thorough assessment tool that we take in and complete before we kick off training, because then that helps us with the case designs. Right, so we build them for the client. It's not Joe versus Bill. It's like real, Joanna versus Kent. This is what they were talking about, a potential partnership. What are the scenarios? What does it look like? Yada yada. So they feel it, because that's how people learn. You asked about being remote. We can do remote, obviously, because of costs, because of travel, but at least a portion of that training should be in person.
I think there's a ton to be said for that, in that it sounds very immersive. But I think from that collective, it's one thing to have your purchasing manager be schooled in negotiations, but very seldom in large size deals do we only have one player of an organization involved. Usually there's a supervisor or maybe even a couple other team members, where I think all those people with shared knowledge, we all learn things differently as well. We all will pick up, I mean, send 5 people to franchise training, they all come out 10 days later with different types of knowledge. So I would imagine the same for you. Is like, you send 5 people to training, well, you probably have a better chance of all 5 people collectively remembering most of what you're teaching versus one person trying to come out with 100% of the knowledge.
Yeah. Well, and from an organizational standpoint, what's really fun, and this is where I'm my weird is showing, I love getting the master service agreements from organizations, especially when they're like under 20 pages. If they're about 100, that's painful, but you learn the culture. Because when you're dealing with the procurement teams, you're getting a sniff of if it's a combative culture where they're trying to push all of the risk on all of their vendors and there's no responsibility to them and they're always going to keep money in their pocket, or if they're reciprocal and that they are actually trying to create a collaborative environment. So those MSAs, the terms and conditions in there, you smell the culture immediately. And that's really fun for us, because then when we go through them and we rip them apart, or not, sometimes they're wonderful and fair, reciprocal. We really get to work with the teams and be like, yeah, you guys do or do not do this.
Love it. What a great way to look at and decipher the true culture of an organization, because the core values, all this stuff sometimes can be platitudes and just stuff on a
Oh,
wall.
yeah.
Whereas a master service agreement truly says, what is a value to you? What is your mindset? It guides your actions and your behaviors and your attitude. Thank you for that insight. That in itself is probably a post for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. So we know where to find you now. Any parting comments and any last thoughts to those out there looking to learn more and want to get better at negotiating?
Don't be afraid to ask. Don't. If you don't ask, you're not going to get. Like so many, even if my friends, now they're getting comfortable because I talk about negotiations all the time.
Mhm.
Just think of negotiations as a door that's closed and you got to figure out how to open it.
Love it. I love the answers. I love the insight. Thank you for tolerating the impromptu questions. You were smiling, so I assume you had some fun and keep up the good work.
This is a great time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.